So like I forgot last week, I told her I was sorry, but it was just me praying for her.
All right. All right. Okay, so obviously we're transitioning here from what Jimmy's been talking about. I am not sure exactly what series we're going to start in on. I was talking to a couple of people about different things, and I have some ideas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out the ideas, couple of ideas here this morning, and I want to hear some feedback from anybody who's here and also online to kind of see what interest there is. And if anybody has something in particular that they're interested in, you can throw it out there too. I'm not even going to promise that I'll take I may not take the one that gets the most votes, so to speak, if even if of the ones that I give, so because I'm not sure which I want to do yet. But I did want to get a little feedback to see what the interest is on a couple of things. So basically, I was telling Jimmy that I don't think any of these are necessarily easy for me. Like they're going to require some prep, no matter which one I choose of these. But I had some of the ideas that I had was and this is probably the more normal, traditional Bible class that I would do, would be going through Acts. The Acts of the Apostles. I think that's an important study because that's where we see the church start. Basically the new way that God wants us to worship Him, the new way to become His child, Christian. All of those things we see in the book of Acts. So I think Acts is an important thing, and also there's different ways of studying it, and I wouldn't normally just go straight through. I would do more topical. So you got like sermons in Acts, you got the work of the Holy Spirit in Acts, you got people being converted. There's a couple of other ways that you can break it down. I forget right off the top of my head. But anyway, so you can kind of go through and emphasize different parts of Acts. So that's one idea that I had. Another idea would be to talk about worship. I think especially in today's America, in the church, and in Christianity in general, I think a lot of people don't know why we worship the way we do. You've got some groups that, there's this example, some groups have women preachers, some groups don't. Some groups come together every Sunday, some groups don't. Some groups take the Lord's Supper every Sunday. Some take it once a month, some take it once a year, or special events or things like that. So some groups do more of a concert for music. Some, like us, we sing without instruments. Why do all these things happen? Why do we do what we do? Why do we come together on Sundays? So that would be a possible topic to discuss. And as I was mentioning to Jimmy, I'm sure that one will not be without very good discussion, right? Like nobody agrees on all those things. So there's a lot of different takes. But what I would plan to do if we did that would be to kind of go through the Bible and talk about, well, what is worship from God's perspective, and what is worship from God's perspective, and then how do we go about determining what we're supposed to do today, how do you do that, since we see so many different ways that people do it. So that's another option. And then the third one, probably the most fun one for me, would be to go through Revelation. I've never taught a class on Revelation, but I do know that you hear a lot of people talking about the end times today and the signs and things like that. A lot of that comes from Revelation. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what Revelation is saying, and a lot of different theories and thoughts on it. So that could be also a good one to go through and kind of talk about. There again, I don't know. Well, we probably would go through that one chapter by chapter, but before we even did that, you kind of have to talk about, well, what was going on around the time that Revelation was written, what's its purpose, what are some theories, the different theories that people have in relation to it. And then, of course, a big thing would be, what do the symbols mean? The symbolic language that's used in it. What do some of those mean? Because you kind of have to get some of that before you can really understand what John is saying in a lot of those things. So those were three of my ideas. Like I said, I'm open to other people's ideas. I'm not going to take a vote here. That's why I said vote in quotes, because I want to hear what people's interest is. So let me know, or send Dave and DP a message or whatever, just if you have interest in one of those things, or if you have interest in something else that we can go through. So those were some of my ideas to talk about. Any one of those three is going to take a little bit of time to kind of start getting ready, so that's why I didn't really want to try to get one of those started today. So I kind of have a different way that we're going to go for the next couple weeks. I think it'll probably only take a couple weeks to do this, but Jimmy has been discussing, how many of a number of people in our congregation are struggling with health or other serious issues. I mean, we've talked about how many people we've lost to death or people who moved out of the area. And then we have just people who are now have chronic health issues. And people who aren't even able to be here with us, present, physically. So we got a lot of that going on. And, and we also have a number of our members that are well-seasoned, meaning that we're getting older, right? That got me to thinking about how, as we get older, as things are, we can't do some of the things that we used to do, how can we keep going and stay productive in our lives when circumstances change and we're no longer able to do what we want to do or what we thought we were meant to do, those kind of things. What do you do? Now, and my lesson isn't specific to that, but it kind of just got me thinking along those lines as far as, what I'm calling this is, living a meaningful life. How does our life live? How do we live it in a way that's meaningful, no matter what stage we're in? Whether it's we don't have any kids in here because they have their own class, but whether you're a kid or whether you're, 90 plus years old. I don't know that we have anybody over 90, that's hit 100 in this congregation, but wherever you are in the age, how do we do things that are meaningful, and what can we do? Back a few years ago, I taught a series of lessons on spiritual growth, and I look back, I think that was, 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe, that we went through that. That seems like a very long time ago, but at this point, I don't think it should be that long ago. But in the first part of that series, we did a bunch of lessons on getting our focus, or what I called getting our focus, becoming focused on what's important. So for the first couple lessons here that I'm going to teach, I'm going to pull some of the material from that, and we're not going to follow it exactly, but I'm going to pull some of the material from that. And I know many of you have heard at least some of this material at least once, probably twice, because I know that I kind of pulled some of it at another time, maybe a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was. But we kind of talked about it at least a couple times. But I feel like it's always relevant. This kind of a lesson is always relevant, and I always get something out of it when I'm thinking about it. So hopefully everyone will hear as well. Plus, here's another little tidbit, and this kind of a lesson always changes as I get older because I get a new perspective as I go through life as far as some of the questions that I ask and some of the things that we'll talk about. Plus, there's usually different people in the audience, so the conversation always goes in a different way. So it's never the same thing twice. So I don't think it'll be just a repeat. I think we'll probably get some new things out of it, but there will be a lot of things that you have heard, or at least some of you have heard before. But we're actually going to start off a little differently this time. It looks like we got something up there. This time, I always do a lot of quotes with this lesson. Elton always, I always ask Elton who, if he remembers who, or maybe it's not Elton, I'm asking everybody, but Elton is always the one that tells me who said the quote or remembers it. And Elton's not here today, so he won't be able to do that anyway. But we're going to start off, I added a few songs in here because there's some songs that, as I listen to songs, that make me think of certain things. And so the first one that I wanted to talk about here is a song by Tim McGraw, My Next 30 Years. And the reason that this came up is because we have music that plays all the time in our bathroom at work. And this is one of the songs that comes on all the time whenever I'm in there. And so I heard this, and it just made me think of something, some things as I hear this song. I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it says the song is an up-tempo in which the narrator celebrates his 30th birthday and reflects on things he'll do in the next 30 years. So I'm just going to take a moment to read these lyrics and then kind of talk a little bit about what it makes me think about. It says, I think I'll take a moment, celebrate my age, the ending of an era, and the turning of a page. Now it's time to focus in on where I go from here. Lord, have mercy on my next 30 years. In my next 30 years, I'm going to have some fun, try to forget about all the crazy things I've done. Maybe now I've conquered all my adolescent fears, and I'll do it better in my next 30 years. My next 30 years, I'm going to settle all the scores, cry a little less, laugh a little more, find a world of happiness without the hate and fear, figure out just what I'm doing here in my next 30 years. Oh, my next 30 years, I'm going to watch my weight, eat a few more salads and not stay up so late, drink a little lemonade and not so many beers. Maybe I'll remember my next 30 years. My next 30 years will be the best years of my life, raise a little family and hang out with my wife, spend precious moments with the ones that I hold dear, make up for lost time here in my next 30 years. So, it's a pretty good song. It's got a nice little beat, and it has some good things to say. I think it's meant to encourage people to think about what they're doing with their lives to some degree. But I had a question. What are a couple of problems that you see with the song right off the bat if you just take it at what it, just for what it says, not considering anything? Tim McGraw has some songs that are pretty deep, actually, other songs that are pretty deep as far as faith and living a good life and those kind of things. This one's kind of more of a fun one, I would say. But anyway, as far as this song just on its surface and on itself, what might be a couple problems? Yep, that's right off the bat, right? You're making an assumption there about your next 30 years, and which kind of goes back to, well, what's important in life is to know that we need to be living every day as if it's our last. There's songs about that too, right? And really focusing on making a difference while we're here. If you take this song at face like I said, at what do you call that? Face value? Yeah, face value. At face value, then it's like you're making an assumption that you have 30 years to work all this out. Like, I'm going to figure out what's up with my life in the next 30 years. I'm going to take the time to come through this, and I'm going to correct all these mistakes. Like, that's the typical problem that we have when we're younger, is that we think we have all the time in the world, right?
I talk about how we program kids in our language. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
When you grow up, yeah.
And a proper question is, what do you want to be right now?
Right. What are you doing right now? Yeah.
Even as a kid, what do you want to do?
So yeah, I think that I can tell you, even if I live what would be considered a full life, but like the full lifespan of a typical American male, I'm not guaranteed 30 more years at the age that I'm at now. And we have several members here who know they don't have 30 more years. So that's a problem right off the top, right? And once again, realizing what the song's for, that's not what it's meant to be saying. Like, I'm not trying to criticize that, but if you just take it at what it says, so that's something that makes me think of, you're not guaranteed 30 years. What else, anybody else have something else that they think of as their?
I didn't hear what Sue said, but life's not certain.
Right, yeah, we're definitely not guaranteed the next 30 years. Like, and you could use whatever number you want, next year, whatever, we're not guaranteed that time. So we need to be focused on doing things now, not over that period. I mean, not to say that we can't plan to do things over the next period, but just to say that we need to be focused on here and now.
The math doesn't add up. He's going to be 150 years old.
The math doesn't add up.
The next 30 years and then the next 30 years.
Well, if he's 30 and then he's saying 30 to 30, I don't know that he's trying to say that he's going to go another 30 beyond that. I think he's going to 90, which, once again, that's not even the normal lifespan, right? That's beyond. I hear another song at work that comes on quite frequently talking about when you only have 100 years to live, and I'm like, who plans on living 100 years? I do. Terry does. So, but anyway, so we're not guaranteed that. Any other issues?
It sounds like he refresh whatever he's doing and he's gotta change it, but, when's he gonna change it?
Right, yeah, kind of like more of a lackadaisical, like, oh, I'll do that as time goes on. Like, yeah, I get a little bit of that, like, yeah, I'll get it right eventually. I'll kind of work through it. And I realize that I have some issues, that maybe I drank too much and maybe I don't remember enough of what I've done or whatever, but I have some time to fix that. Definitely, yeah, that more of a sense of urgency needs to be put into those kind of things. Another thing that I thought of is that, there's some good thoughts about how, what to do in the next 30 years, but it seems primarily to focus on his own happiness and not on making a difference in the lives of other people. So there again, not meant to be that deep song that gets you there, but just on the surface, that's what it makes me think of. Like, well, there's not a lot there about helping others out or serving God. Certainly is not part of that at all. Which, once again, it's not a religious song, not meant to be that. So you got a caveat with that as far as that goes.
People, do you think, go through that next 30 years thinking they made a mistake, and they go, well, I got 29 more years to fix that. And then next thing you know, it's 28 years. Then it's
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you don't, when you have that kind of attitude, you never get there. You never do what you're thinking you're going to do. So anyway, that's kind of some things that it makes me think of, and I think it's a good jumping off point for what we're talking about living a meaningful life. What's involved in doing that. So here, let's get into something that you guys, if you've been in my class, you've heard this question or quote before. I'm going to do one of my quotes. Every man dies, not every man really lives. That's a quote from William Wallace in Braveheart. I don't know who really said it. I don't know if that historical figure actually said that or what, but that's where I heard it. So, when you hear a quote like that, every man dies, not every man really lives, what does that make you think? What do you think of?
They just go along with what's going on around them.
Yeah, it means, to me, it means that, death's a certainty. We're all going to die. Unless Jesus comes back before we die, we're all going to die. Like, we know that that's a certainty. But not everybody really lives. In other words, it's what we do here while we're alive that really matters. And if we don't do that, if we don't accomplish things, then we haven't really lived. So what does it really mean to live? Well, I kind of just said that, but for William Wallace and Braveheart, it meant being free from English rule, right? From the tyranny that they were putting on them, which, if you see the movie or know history, it was pretty brutal, some of the things that they were doing to them. But anyway, so that's what it meant to him. What does Paul tell us about freedom? And let me get my Bible up here. Galatians 5:1, it says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." And then going down to verse 13, it says, "For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." Now then, if you know the history of a little bit of what was going on with Galatia, the church in Galatia, they were having all kinds of problems. Jimmy, am I correct on this? Was Galatia the ones that had decided that they could do anything they wanted? Because
I'm unclear what the issues were.
yeah, I mean, obviously they were saying that you had to be circumcised, and they were turning back to the old law. That was the big issue that was being addressed. I feel like there was, and I didn't look this up. I should have looked it up before this morning, but I feel like also they had kind of turned things kind of like Corinthians, where it was a mess, as far as not the same mess, but a mess as far as they were kind of like, you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you go back to relying on Jesus. So it's very, what do you call that? What's that? Yeah, like what we see today quite a bit, right? Do whatever you want. God loves you, no matter what it is. I feel like that was there, but I could be mistaken on that. But certainly that was an issue and is an issue that we have today, no matter what. So in what ways are we free? What are Christians? How are Christians free?
I and so legalistic in the way that we read scriptures that, you know, they were requiring circumcision and, you know, just biting each other. Like he talks about that in this context. It's like, verse 15, but if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. It's just this constant nitpicking and micromanaging the law, and Christ set us free from having to micromanage everything and be
Right.
bound to traditions.
I was, that's certainly, I think we're a big part of what Paul's writing is we're free from the law, right? Because that was a big thing, old law versus Christianity, because they were still, I mean, many of the people were Jews who had been practicing Judaism all their life, and so they, of course, were bringing some of that into Christianity. And I think that was kind of Paul's, you see that a lot in Paul's writings, is that's fine, but you can't require it on others, and it can't supersede the new, what we're now doing, right? If you want to be circumcised, you can be circumcised. If you want to celebrate these days, right? In 1 Corinthians it talks about celebrate these days, you can celebrate those days. But I think that his point is that you're not supposed to condemn others for things that are no longer required to be done. I was talking with my mom a little bit this morning about how people in the church, you know, there's so few what you would call conservative churches left, and yet, you know, whenever you get into the churches that say anything goes, they all stick together, right? You don't see a lot of there's a lot of division, but not division amongst them. But whenever you get into churches where we're saying, hey, how we worship matters, and what you do here matters, and those kind of things, there's so much argumenting and fragmenting amongst the churches of Christ and churches that really try to hold to the New Testament, because we get so set on doing what we see and what we think should be done. And that's not bad per se, except for whenever you get into exactly what we're talking about here, where you know, they were condemning each other for things that weren't important, that weren't a matter that needed to be condemned, that they needed to be condemned for. So we need to make sure. I mean, there are matters where it is important, and we have to stand up and say this is what it is. But there are also matters where it's just like in our lives we have the freedom to choose what we're going to do, and somebody else has the freedom to choose what they're going to do. You know, we shouldn't condemn each other for that. So we have freedom from, like you were saying, the legalism of the old law. I think we have freedom from, of course, Christians have freedom, we should anyway, have freedom from the fear of death and the penalty of sin, because we know that because of Christ we've been forgiven. We shouldn't have to have that guilt and those kind of things. So two different questions here. In what ways are people of the world in general not free? And then how are Christians, what aren't we free? You know, when you say we're free, but in what ways aren't we free? You know, so in what ways are people not free? Because some of those are the same, they overlap.
Practice their religion.
What's that?
Practice of religion is not free.
Yeah, we're not free just to do whatever we want
Right.
in how we worship God. That's one of the things that I talked about, right, this morning as a possibility to talk. We're not free just to say we're going to do whatever we want to worship God. Like he does, if you study the Bible, starting in the Old Testament and go all the way through, worship is pretty important to God. Like you can't say, well, it doesn't matter how I worship just as long as I do. No, God says, I mean, especially when you go into the Old Testament, but you can see it in the New Testament as well. He says, this is how it's going to be done, and what happened when they didn't do it that way. A lot of consequences to that. And I'm not going to go down that lesson because I don't know if we're going to go there, but anyway, that's clear. So we're not free to just do whatever we want. What else aren't we free? In what other ways are we not free?
We're not free to harm people. I mean, the whole law is summed up in loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Like, we're not free to do things for our benefit that harm other people.
Right. Yeah. Well, and what we are free to do is to do the right thing. That's what we always talk about, right? As Christians, we're supposed to do the right thing. So yeah, that would certainly involve helping others, not hindering others.
to your first question, what's the world not free from? You know, I think, again, contextually, like Paul really is mirroring what he said in Romans 6, that you were slaves to sin.
Yep, you're not, yep.
You know, it binds you, it holds you down.
And Christians-
you become slaves to that, and it masters you.
And Christians can still become slaves of sin. We're not immune to it. We should be free from sin if we're living the way God wants us to, and we don't suffer the penalty of sin, but we can still allow ourselves to fall into that. Does anybody here think that we're perfect because we're Christians? No. So we can easily fall back into sin, and that's what we see Paul warning a lot of in what he in his letters about not falling back into those things. So yeah, we can become slaves of sin, and people in the world are slaves of sin because they don't have that hope. What's that?
There are so many things out there that tempt you.
Yeah, we've talked about that before too. Your temptation may not be the same as my temptation, but we all have something that is a weakness of ours. We all have something that we struggle with. Yeah, well, things, yeah. But you know, so whenever we look at people, some people, their struggles are obvious. You can see what they are. But many people, we don't know what the struggles are. They're hidden. And that's the way it is with many of us here. We don't know what each other struggle with because either we hide it from each other or we don't know each other well enough to know that. Right, that's what I mean. Yeah, we hide it because of being ashamed of it or those kind of things, yeah. No, yeah, and if you are struggling with something we need to find people to help us with those things and to share with others. We can also become slaves to our own selfishness, our own desires. If God's not God, who's God? What's the most important thing in your life? Yeah, it becomes yourself, right? And there again, that's something that certainly the people in the world who don't have Christ are having to struggle with. But Christians can struggle with that too. We can still, sometimes we put ourselves over God. So we can struggle with that. And here's one that I thought of that I think is pretty important, that we can often become slaves to what other people expect. Other people's expectations. Like we feel like we have to behave a certain way or do certain things because of what others expect of us. And what's that?
Peer pressure.
Yeah, well, peer pressure or what we think others expect of us as well. So, yeah, no doubt. Well, the biggest place that you see peer pressure, of course, is in high school. That's where you remember it the most, but it doesn't ever really end. If you're in a group of people and you hesitate to speak out because of something that you think everybody else disagrees with or whatever, or if other people can pressure you, that always can be the case. All right, so why are we free as Christians, or how can we be free as Christians? We struggle with all these things, but how do we know that we're free, or how can we be free? Like we talked about, to answer that in the negative, we're not free to do whatever we want, right? That's not the kind of freedom we're talking about.
Well, again, in Romans 6, Paul does this compare and contrast. He says, you were slaves to sin, but instead you should be slaves to righteousness.
Right. Or he says, so shall we sin the more so that grace can increase? Like, because of grace, because you're forgiven, should you sin more because of that? No. Doesn't make any sense, right? So we're not free to do whatever we want to do. Mark 8, 34 through 36. Jesus says, and he summoned the multitude with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel shall save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? So clearly by that statement, well, let me ask you, what does Jesus mean by that statement? What does it mean to you? What's that? Our other alternative?
Hell.
Well, yeah, if we go down the wrong road, yes. But inherent in that statement, we're not free to do whatever we want, right? Because he says, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself. Take up his cross and follow me, for whoever wishes to save his life. So, in other words, if we're more focused on our own lives and doing what we want to do than doing what God wants us to do, we're headed in the wrong direction, right? But God's view of what makes us free is Jesus and our obedience to him. You know, how if we obey Jesus. Our view of freedom is what? Having fun. We're kind of going back to that song that we were talking about, like having fun. What makes us feel good right now, in the moment. And when you do that, you can become a slave to this world and to our fears and our own desires and all those things. So we're free from that. I've always said, because I grew up in the church and I never had what you would consider to be a wild streak where, I went out partying or any of that stuff. I just never did that. And I always thought from the get-go, as I looked around at what was happening to people in high school, friends of mine or people who I just knew, who did that kind of thing, I was always like, even if it weren't for my belief in God, I'm living a better life than they are. Because of the things that I did because of my belief in God. But you take God out of it, it's still better because they would become. I mean, like, what's fun about not remembering what you did last night? I never got the attraction. But some people think that's the way to go, and so that's something that we.
They're so caught up in what's going on around them that they want to be a part of it.
Right. That goes back to the peer pressure and some of being part of the group, or to some degree anyway. And then some people just struggle with that. Once again, once you get started on something like that, that might be your weakness. That might be something that you're. Right. All right. So of course, freedom. So we talked about freedom here and freedom from guilt and punishment. And that's a huge part of living life as a Christian, which is what we're kind of focusing on, living a meaningful life as a Christian. But another very important part of this is our actions and doing, what we do with our lives. Obviously what we do is a huge, that is what makes our life productive or unproductive. Let's go to James 1, 22 through 27. We got just a few minutes here, so we may or may not get through this part, but one of you guys back there want to read James 1, 22 through 27 for us?
Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive the meekness in the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For anyone is hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and forgets once what he is like. But one who looks into a perfect law and law of liberty and preserves, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, will be a blessing in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but perceives his heart, this tongue's religion is worthless. Religion is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, who is to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep ones unstained from the world.
All right, so James says, but prove yourselves doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves. Are we ever guilty of just talking about what we're supposed to do as Christians, as opposed to actually getting out there and doing it? Hopefully not, but I'm sure there have been times where we spend more time studying than we do doing, right? Or thinking about it. This talks about the importance of action in our lives. James emphasizes that even more when you get over to chapter 2, verse 14. He starts talking about, what use is it, my brethren, if a man says he has faith, but he has no works? That's a common scripture that we go to talk about, faith and works and how those things work together, what it means to have faith. But we got to take action, and that's really important. Now, here's a quote that you guys should know because I've said it at least a couple times, I know. And let's see if you can pick out who said this one. Life is not a spectator sport. If you're going to spend your whole life in the grandstand just watching what goes on, in my opinion, you're wasting your life. Obviously sports related. Anybody remember who said that? Some of you guys were here for some time where I've asked that, right? What's that?
DP should know.
DP?
Huh?
You know who said that? All right. DP's not awake. Jackie Robinson said that. So, are we playing the game? Are we in the game? Or are we just spectators? Many people just go through the motions of life instead of really living it to its fullest. And what we're discussing is, what's really involved in living a meaningful life. There's another quote from a song by Rebecca St. James that says, until you find something worth dying for, you're not really living. Do we really think that we have something worth dying for? We should.
If you believe in Christ, you do.
Yeah, as Christians, we should have something that's worth dying for. So the question is, do we have enough faith that if faced with death, some Christians in the world are faced with death. We have not been faced with that so much here in the United States. But if faced with death, would we still be willing to do the right thing? That's an important question to ask yourself. It's not something that we want to just have to decide on the spur of the moment, right?
See, I don't know, because, like you said, it's that spur of the moment thing.
It's not something you had time to think about.
But it can
Well,
be.
You should have been
Yeah.
thinking about it for a long time.
If
but
we-
a
if
lot
we-
of people, they don't.
If we know what we believe in,
Yes.
and it comes down to it, we should know the answer to that question when the time comes, if the time ever came. But we've really been protected here. Jimmy likes to emphasize that, about how what we consider persecution, not really the kind of persecution that's talked about in the New Testament. Whenever you had people that were being killed in not pleasant ways, just for proclaiming Christ. So we really, what's that?
Just because of somebody else's ideology.
If we truly believe in God and Christ and that we found the right thing, then we should have that. We have something worth dying for. And that should allow us to truly live, because once you know that, that should become the most important thing to you. All right, we're going to stop right there and pick it up next week. Like I said, I'm not sure. This will probably, we'll at least go through next week. I don't know if it'll go a week past that or not. It depends on how much we talk and how much I talk and all those kind of things. But then we'll go get into one of those series that we talked about and see where we go from there. So, all right, thanks everybody, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes.